All right, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you in today on today's webinar, the Q3 Macroeconomics Outlook, of course, brought to you by Nairametrics. It promises to be quite interesting. We're exploring renewed hope, and we know that that renewed hope agenda is a whole policy framework that this administration campaigned on and is supposedly running on. And I think that's something we're probably going to assess and get a quick reality check today. Obviously, the goal with that renewed hope agenda was to somewhat reposition Nigeria as, global investment hub. And we know that Rome was not built in a day, but it's been well over a year. And perhaps it's about time that we have that reality check. So Nairametrics is bringing you this Q3 macroeconomic outlook, renewed hope or reality check, and of course also identifying, because in spite of everything that is happening right now, there are people who are making the most of it, right? And are finding opportunities in this volatile economy. So we're going to get into it. And with conversations like this, it can be easy for it to be one-sided, but the Nairametrics team has done an amazing job with the lineup of speakers, right? We've set up it's not the usual, I can assure you of that, but a very robust panel, right? So that we can have a well-rounded conversation. It's going to be spectacular, right? And we're delighted to have every single one of our panelists in, from politicians to economists, to financial advisory, political analyst, union member, professor. So it's a well-rounded conversation that we are going to have. And because of time constraints, because it's still hopefully 2 hours, we want to encourage our guests to keep their answers within 2 minutes so that we'll be able to also take a question and answer segment towards the end. So if you're in the audience right now, the conversation is going to be interesting. You may have your thoughts to share. You may want to introduce yourself as well. There's a chat box for you to do so. And there's also the Q&A box for you to drop your questions. As the conversation progresses, some of our panelists may be opportune to answer the questions in the Q&A box. Otherwise, towards the end, some of those questions will be highlighted and brought to the fore and asked to the panelists directly. So, keep those spots busy. I am Joanna Mustafa, one of several moderators today, because there's no way I could have done this alone, right? So driving the conversation, we have two other moderators, a known face when it comes to asking the right questions about the Nigerian economy and markets. We have newscaster and reporter, as well as producer on Channels Television, Ladi Williams. Ladi, can you just, say hello?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Joanna. Thank you, Dre and the Nairametrics team. It's great to be here, and I know that this is going to be a very interesting webinar. Thank you so much for having me.
Indeed, it's a pleasure, and we look forward to this interesting conversation, Nairametrics Q3 Macroeconomic Outlook. We also have broadcaster, presenter, and producer of at Classic 94.3 FM Abuja, Faith Dafe Joseph. Good morning, Faith.
Good morning, Joanna. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I look forward to an interesting conversation today.
All right. Thank you so much for that. And of course, we have our panelists. I don't know whether I was set up or I set myself up. The profiles are robust. I'm going to do my best to get through them in the time I have. And again, we are delighted to have every single one of you in with different perspectives, different worlds of experiences to this topic. Renewed hope or reality check, identifying opportunities in a volatile economy. So let's begin by introducing Mr. Tokwe Fasao. He is a Nigerian entrepreneur, an economist, a politician, a writer. He serves as the special advisor to the President of Nigeria on economic affairs. In 2019, he was a presidential candidate for the Abundant Nigeria Renewal Party, which he founded and led as a national chairman. He's also the founder and CEO of Global Analytics Consulting Limited, which is an international consulting firm based in Abuja, Nigeria. He has experience in banking. He also has experience in business as the founder of Global Analytics Consulting Limited, where he serves as the group CEO. He's a prolific writer, having authored 4 books, one of them being A Change Will Come. And he contributes to articles on global and national economic matters and is a columnist for various leading Nigerian newspapers. So it's a pleasure to have Mr. Tokwe Fasao in. Next up, short, simple, straight to the point, Mr. Olusegun Zaccheaus. He is a partner and lead for strategy, in West Africa at PwC. He has over 15 years experience in advising clients primarily in financial services, as well as telecommunications, consumer markets, and public sector. I look forward to getting insights from Mr. Olusegun Zaccheaus. We have Mrs. Hawa Mustafa, and I guess we're going to have to, somebody's going to have to pay dues on the surname because I am also Mustafa. But it's a pleasure to have you in. She holds the BSc and MSc in economics from the University of Zaria and an MA in international affairs from NDA Kaduna. She has extensive experience in civil liberties and civil service and is currently a senior staff member with the Nigerian Labour Congress. She has over 25 years of experience in community development. And yeah, she serves as a senior staff member there. She's contributing her expertise in labor and employment issues. We know that that's a hot topic right now with the whole minimum wage discussion. She's a member of the 2009 Vision 2020 Presidential Committee, serving under the Trade and Commerce Thematic Group. Also, she works with NGOs in Nigeria, including being a board member of International Center for Regional Integration and Trade Research at Nnamdi Azikiwe University. I could go on and on. Like I said, the profiles are robust, but it's a pleasure to have you, Ms. Awa Mustafa. We also have with us Dr. Muda Yusuf. He's no stranger to the house. He is an immediate past Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And he served in that capacity for well over a decade. He's currently the founder and CEO of the Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise, an NGO which is committed to the ideals of free enterprise and private sector development. He holds a doctorate degree in business administration from Swiss Business School, Switzerland. And of course, he has participated in numerous high-level public policy advocacy dialogue at both the federal and the state level, maybe local government with what's going on there recently. But he's a leading advocate of an enabling environment for the Nigerian private sector. We have Dr. Muda Yusuf. Real quick, we have 2 more to go. Okay, 3 more actually. We have Dr. Olusegun Omisaki. He is a chief economist and director of research and development at Nigerian Economic Summit Group. He adeptly applies economic theories to inform strategic decisions and research outcomes across Africa. It's really interesting to see some of the theories he's able to apply to what's going on in the economy, in the Nigerian economy right now, and see how that guides decisions. But you know, it's been said that Nigeria specifically has defied several economic theories, but it'll be interesting to get his perspective on the conversation today. So it's a pleasure to have you in, Dr. Olusegun. Up next, we have Professor Ogunlana Olarinwaju Fatai. He is a professor of economics and the head of Department of Economics. He has lectured both undergraduate, postgraduate levels in different faculties at the Lagos State University, Ojo. He's also a member of Nigerian Economic Society. He is a fellow of Strategic Institute for Natural Resources and Human Development. It's a pleasure to have you in, Prof, and I look forward to getting, you know, your insights into today's conversation. We also have Mr. Abdul Rauf Aliu, who is a development economist and public financial management specialist. He has worked as a consultant to several state governments on several economic reform projects, co-founder and senior partner with Fringe Insight LLP, which is an African-focused strategic foresight and political economy risk advisory firm. It's a pleasure to have you, Mr. Aliu. And finally, this profile, I definitely could not have gotten through everything. Very robust, and perhaps you can even have a look yourself later on. and do follow-ups and all of that. But we have Dr. Mercy Bello Abu, who is a consultant and a clarity mindset strategist. She's a trainer, I beg your pardon, at IHP Consulting Services, which is a well sought after entrepreneurship, leadership, and clarity mindset research coach and a public speaker. She has served as ex-publicity secretary of Port Harcourt Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mines and Agriculture. She's the appointed coordinator of Women's International Shipping and Trading Association, River State chapter, and the profile goes on and on and on. Of course, several awards also won. So it's a pleasure to have you in, Dr. Mercy Bello Abu. Like I said, this conversation, well-rounded, robust, different perspectives. We look forward to getting into it. We are going to head now and get a presentation from the founder and CEO of Nairametrics himself, in person of Mr. Ugo Dre. Good morning, Mr. Ugo.
Good morning, Joanna. Thank you so much for that robust presentation. I was envying you as we're going on and on and on with the panelist profile. Amazing panelists we'll have today on this webinar. All right, so welcome everyone. Good to have you guys here. This is, of course, Nairametrics quarterly economic outlook. See, it's been a very, very difficult year. We all know that, but we all know that Nigerians are very resilient. So today, you're going to find out how we can navigate ourselves out of this difficult economic challenge that we'll find ourselves in. It's not been easy, but I know Nigerians can get through it. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
All right, great. So I'm going to try and keep this under 10 minutes because there's just so much to discuss and I don't want to waste too much time. All right, so first off, this is what we face in this economy. And I think it's been like this since last year. This is basically what we at Nairametrics think that the government is trying to fix. Firstly, we have a high inflationary environment driven predominantly by high energy prices, which started globally before it now filtered into Nigeria. We have currency depreciation. We have money supply challenges because of the intervention funds that we've had in the last 8 years. And that's the size of those intervention funds. And then, of course, we also deal with insecurity and logistics. So these are major issues or potpourri of issues that has led to the high inflation environment that we'll find ourselves in. And then, of course, we now go to fiscal. So because we've also had, we're getting funds in with government revenues, with the, ineffective budgets that really haven't driven, to have challenges with fiscal deficit because we basically are spending more than we're earning. And so when you have fiscal deficit, that also leads to increased public debt because then you have to borrow to keep spending. And then lastly, all of this in economic growth, with countries growing as fast as we all expect. So and of course, per day, so there is from the previous years, even though there are new policies now that we've seen that are taking hold. And of course, there's still weak manufacturing. So basically, like if you just like sort of in this.
Looks like
Can you hear me? I think my network just went off. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now, but we can't see your screen. So hopefully we'll.
Let me try and let me.
All right, hopefully we can have him back up any moment now. But I mean, I think it's just astounding just how much the Nigerian economy has been through in just over a 1 year period. I think it'll be interesting to get in depth or get into it. and see just how much has, been affected and just how in line we are with the Renewed Hope policy document framework that this administration campaigned on and hopes to run with, or is running on. Ugodre, are you there now?
Yes, I am. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, great.
All right, fantastic. So I'll just wrap this up quickly. Apologies for that. All right, so what has the government put forward? So we've seen Renewed Hope and, of course, the reality check. So firstly, straight out of the block, subsidy removal and was what the president put out. And then, of course, the effect here is higher inflation. And then we had a slew of Forex reforms that we're still seeing, being turned on and on and on. We're seeing a lot of Forex reform being churned out by the central bank. And the effect, of course, is massive FX depreciation that we're all seeing. And then, of course, we've had high interest rates because you need to raise interest rate when you're facing, inflation challenges. So we've seen that happen. But the effect is that with high interest rate, you're seeing exits of multinational organizations. You're seeing JACPA as well. And then you're seeing weak purchasing power of Nigerians because high interest rate means corporates can't borrow cheaply. So that has been the immediate effect of, the Renewed Hope and the reality check that we're having. But there have also been a lot of policies that the government has also introduced that will take time to start to pan out. First of all, on the fiscal policy side, like I mentioned, you've seen the first subsidy removal. You've seen a lot of tax reforms. You've seen them also trying to cut back taxes for the private sector, for the public, for private institutions, for organizations, for small businesses. You've seen a lot of waivers. Just last week, we saw several executive orders from the president waiving different taxes as well, reducing withholding tax, suspending some withholding taxes for some SMEs. We've seen efforts at the government are trying to also reform the civil service. And then on the monetary policy side, of course, I mentioned FX reforms. You've seen what the central bank wants to do with bank recapitalization and how they want to use that to drive growth in the economy. And of course, you've also seen a halt of intervention funds. What I said was adding to a lot of the increase in money supply that we had in previous years. And of course, higher interest rates so that you can draw in capital from foreign investors. We had $3.9 billion, $3.6 or so billion in the first quarter alone from foreign investors this year. And of course, in terms of palliatives, you've seen efforts at trying to make students' loans available to Nigerians. You've seen consumer credit schemes. Even though the minimum wage that they're offering is way low, but we've seen wage awards and negotiations are going on right now to try and agree on what the right minimum wage should be. And of course, you've also seen conditional cash transfers. And then on the investment side, there's been a lot of efforts at power sector reforms. And then you've got this whole slew of digital economic strategy that the Ministry of Telecommunications is also trying to push. And of course, there's been talk around several infrastructure projects, even though some might be controversial. But this is just in a nutshell what the government has been trying to do just to push the economy forward. These are the policies that we have. Not my policy, government policy. But what does this all mean? Oh my God, in the last year, compared to now from when the president has come, we'll have this dashboard at Nairametrics where we tend to look at different things that is going on. And as you can see, it's a bit of a mixed bag. So some good things economically has happened, some bad things as well. But in a nutshell, we still find ourselves in difficult economic challenges. And I hope that with today's discussion, we can find solutions, we can find opportunities to all the challenges that is before us. Over to you, Joanna. That is it from me.
All right. I mean, that was quite concise, but a lot was said there. And I'm sure, some people may want to get their hands on this presentation. Of course, this whole webinar is recorded. So it's been made available during the week, hopefully Monday, Tuesday, for you to, go back on it, rewatch and, get more in depth on the data there that was provided. So make sure you also subscribe to our YouTube channel. So we're going to get into the conversation in depth now. And with that, I'm going to hand over to one of our moderators, Ladi Williams.
Thank you so much, Joanna, and definitely very interesting presentation there by Ugodre. But we're going to move things on quickly now, moving on to the first panel session. And for this session, I'll be speaking with Dr. Tope Fashola, Dr. Muda Yusuf, Dr. Olusegun Omisaki, Mr. Olusegun Zacchaeus, Professor Gunlano Olarewaju Fatai. And this will focus on public finances, infrastructure, human, public sector, and the economy, definitely. So I'm going to kick off now with Dr. Tope Fashola. Definitely, we've seen a lot of reforms in this new leadership. And we did hear the vice president say that Nigeria's public sector reforms have achieved about 80% so far. So I'd like to hear from you, Ms. Fashwa. Looking at the public sector reform so far, what transformational actions would you say have been completed in the past year of this administration, and what can we look forward to this time?
All right, thank you very much, Ladi. It's good to see you. It's good to be here. Thanks for the invite. You decided to ask me a somewhat political question, though it still has bearing on the economy. But I was hoping to speak about the economic reforms because I'm special advisor on economy. But still, I'm going to still mention that. Can I share my screen very briefly? And I'll be able to present much faster. But essentially speaking, from the question you've asked, regarding the public sector reform, you see that it has started already. The president has made some statements about even the Aransai report and how some of the MDAs will be merged to make them tighter and more efficient. And apart from that, really, we started seeing instances where some of the MDAs have started getting memos from the presidency with regard to, how they were going to merge their operations and what have you. So that seems to be a fait accompli. However, I've also heard people say, we have 45 ministers, maybe it's going to be 46 with the initiative on ranching and what have you. I say that it's something I've engaged with in the past, but we can actually have that many ministers and still have a small government. It's possible. Okay, look at a place like Ministry of Investment, Trade and Industry. That is 3 ministries in one, honestly, because investment is one thing, industry is another, trade is another, entirely different. Now, I'm not saying that we should splinter ministries everywhere, but for focus. So it will now depend on how much appurtenances of office and hangovers and all sorts of people that are working in those places. We can actually still ensure that we are very, very streamlined. So Aransai seems to have kicked off somehow. And of course, you see the master stroke that the president is working on regarding local government being independent now. Of course, that is still public sector reform. And it's very, very critical that the local government should be able to manage their own affairs. I remember very much in 1999, the local government had considerable levels of independence. Of course, it's probably never going to be total, but that itself, and that's the thing about policies and reforms. There's nothing that should be static. The biggest room in the world is a room for change and improvement. And if in 1999 we had fairly independent local government, maybe by now in 2024 we need to go back to that level, because it seemed like the state governors running everything, including local government, they seem to have taken focus away from the local government, and in taking focus away from the local government, we miss the opportunity of harnessing the kind of growth that can come from the local government level. We abandoned agriculture. There's been a lot of insecurity. It kept going on gradually, but of course now we are able to tame that. So I think I'll just keep it at that 2 levels. But to quickly say that apart from from political reforms and public sector reforms, we have done 3 very serious reforms in the economy. Of course, the first one with fuel subsidy, and the second with Naira floating, and we know the effect of that. Very risky, especially the floating of the Naira. It seems to undo the fuel subsidy removal. That's the thing. It seems to put pressure on the fuel subsidy removal, the more the Naira is floated. And of course, we need to also continue to look at that policy, because like I said earlier, no policy is perfect. And of course, there's one policy that I like to mention, which we usually don't talk about, and that is this ways and means. So whereas we had about 30 trillion ways and means which the government found net on ground. We've been able to pay about 7.3 trillion out of that, according to the coordinating minister for the economy. And that's quite remarkable, because from what I know, if you look at this graph, which is the balance sheet of the US Fed, you see that in 2020, there was a spike in the balance sheet, which has been going on, maybe just receding very slightly recently, you know, which tells you that post-COVID and during COVID and post-COVID, every central bank in the world actually printed money. And, you know, and a lot of them, none of them is even talking about paying back. So the truth is also that whereas we ran the Ways and Means account up to about 7 trillion pre-COVID, of course, that's the former government. They had their own challenges and what have you. But post-COVID, at least about 20 trillion was spent in COVID, and afterwards, the central bank went haywire, like every central bank. This is the Bank of England. You can see the same thing in 2020. It was so low there, and then boom. And you know, all the spending for COVID is still being warehoused mainly by the Bank of England. This is the European Central Bank. The same story of 2020. Look at that. Boom, you know, and so I think that one thing we've done is to you know, have taken on this very hard reforms. Okay, and like the central bank governor said yesterday, we've paid 7.5 billion. Was it yesterday or 2 days ago? 7.5 billion of dollars in terms of the obligations that the central bank met on ground, which is quite remarkable. So, what are the risks? The risks include, you know, is it that, you know, are we doing too much already? You know. Because you know, you could also suffer from what they call premature load bearing, you know, in terms of if you're taking on too much, you want to. But I'm happy. I work in this government. There are challenges and all that, but there's a government that really wants to achieve something. The reforms are bold. The steps are bold. I call it a government of accountants. So when the president came in as an accountant himself, as an auditor, the whole idea is, look, why are we sitting on this 30 trillion ways and means? Right. We need to walk it down. I said, I'll be done in just 1 second. So, so basically, that's the way I look at it, and I think that those reforms will work. I'll be able to speak to the rest of my slides later on. Thank you very much for giving me the time.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Fashua. Definitely, we've seen a lot of reforms, and most have been quite painful at this time. But yeah, I guess. We've heard experts say that we'll have to do some heavy lifting before we can get some kind of soft landing. But let me come to Dr. Muda Yusuf now. This is specifically to, you know, public finances at this time. We've seen, you know, some other governments, new leaderships like in Argentina. We've seen them, you know, try to reduce cost of governance, you know, to the best that they can. But how do you feel this new administration has performed when it comes to public finances, specifically to the fuel subsidy removal, electricity tariffs, and, you know, talking about the heavy lifting? Nigerians have had to lift a lot when it comes to fuel subsidy and tariffs. Shout out to the Band A. Dr. Muda, you can help us with that.
Well, thank you very much for having me. First, I think one needs to, you know, stress or highlight the point that one of the first things the administration did when it took over was to address the issue of tax reform and fiscal reforms, which led almost immediately to the setting up of the Presidential Committee on Tax Reforms. And our expectation is that with this Presidential Committee, quite a lot will happen that will impact positively on public finance. The results or the reports have been unveiled piecemeal. Some are in the works, some have been announced. But our expectation is that going forward, we see a much more improvement in our tax revenue, particularly with the promise of leveraging technology, you know, to improve tax revenue. In the first 6 months of the administration, we had a very good traction on fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation is about optimizing revenue and also reducing expenditure. But more importantly, on the revenue side, the reforms improved on the revenue performance significantly. I'm talking about the subsidy removal, which unfortunately seems to now be back, and the foreign exchange reform. So that improved significantly. But recently, in the second half, we are beginning to see some risks to this public finance or fiscal consolidation of government. We are beginning to see that the revenue projection of about 18 trillion for the 2024 budget may be under very serious risk. It's now looking a bit optimistic, given what is happening to our oil output, given the fact that we are now having challenges with our debt. Our debt is growing at a level that is making some of us very uncomfortable, particularly from the point of view of the debt service. Debt to GDP ratio, which used to be, far around below 50, which used to be around 20, 23, 25, is now close to 50%. And that, of course, has implications also for debt service to revenue. So with respect to debt and implication for public finance, I think it's something that we should worry about. At the inception of the administration, particularly at the inception of the reforms, we had a much better situation with this fuel subsidy. It was practically removed entirely at the inception of the administration. But with what had happened between then and now with the exchange rate, and with what has happened with the relativity of the strength of our currency vis-a-vis the currencies of our neighboring countries, particularly the CFA, the subsidy thing and the smuggling of petroleum products has increased significantly because the incentives has increased. And that, of course, is also affecting the capacity of the NNPC to support the revenue performance of government, to support the federation accounts. And there's a great risk that that may further affect our public finance position and affect the fiscal consolidation. In a draft that was released, although the draft was eventually withdrawn, but we saw in that draft, it was a draft on this stabilization plan, which says that the fuel subsidy at the end of the year may end up to about 5 trillion naira. Perhaps it may even be more than that, given what is happening now. It's a very tricky situation. It's a catch-22 situation. It's very difficult from a social and political point of view to push forward with the continuous withdrawal of the subsidy. But the reality is that the subsidy is back and it's posing a major threat to fiscal consolidation and a major threat to our finances. And of course, as we speak, we already have quite a lot of forward sales, forward commitments of our crude to be able to source foreign exchange. We have had that before this administration. That this administration, we have even had also that. I mean, the Afrexim Bank loan is a forward, is anchored on forward sales as well. So this has implications for revenue, liquidity going forward, and that, of course, is a major issue. It's also affecting the capacity of NNPC to be able to support domestic refining capacity and all of that. So these are issues, and we also need to see a lot more in terms of expenditure rationalization, because if you are talking about fiscal sustainability, it's not only about looking at optimizing revenue, it's also about rationalizing expenditure. So we need to see a lot more of that. I'm not sure we are seeing much of that. And again, we are faced with a dilemma now because of the social pushback to some of these reforms. The government has offered to give some concessions on taxes, and more importantly, on import duty concession. These are things that are desirable, but this also has implications for revenue. So the revenue situation and the fiscal balance situation is something that one is not very comfortable with at all. And the way to deal with this, I think, is to also show some more courage in cutting down expenditure, stepping down some projects which may not be that critical. And there's a hint to that a few days ago that some of these projects may have to be stepped down. We need to look at how we can ramp up public-private partnership to see how we can mobilize more private capital, to complement whatever the government is doing. We need to see what we can also do with our oil output. We are still struggling, on optimization of oil output. About a week ago, the NNPC GMD complained, raised an alarm that there should be a state of emergency with respect to oil output production. So these are things that are very, very concerning. The fiscal situation, the fiscal outlook is not looking too good, and I think we need to do something drastic with respect to both revenue and with respect to cutting down on spending. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muda, there highlighting some major risks when it comes to revenue generation right here. And definitely we've seen a little improvement when it comes to oil production from the last OPEC MOMR, but definitely we need to do more at this time because that's our mainstay. And that's how we get most of our Forex at this time. But let me take it on to Dr. Olusegun Omisaki now. Definitely, we've seen most of the indicators, moving in the opposite direction. We've seen the battle, to tame inflation, food inflation. We see the rise, slower than before, but definitely would like to feel more, when we go to the markets at this time. So we're seeing the rate hikes. We've had about over 600 basis points so far in the first half of 2024, and definitely that has impacted GDP. At this time, looking at the GDP growth rate for the first half of 2024, we still see the money supply issues. Last count, about 100 trillion in May 2024, and this is despite what the actions we've seen from the CBN when it comes to arresting money supply at this time. So what is your assessment of the actions taken and completed by this administration to improve the economy thus far? As for Dr. Misaki.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me also thank Nairametrics for this opportunity to be part of the this program. And I want to quickly say that the previous speakers, they've, I think, taken enough time to explain the key economic updates, and I think they've done justice to that. For me, I think how we can also look at it, it's to recognize and acknowledge that the government, the current administration, has some gains for the past 1 year. The administration has, of course, some misses, and again, some opportunities that I think we can also explore. So it's a win-win game if we look at how the current volatility and economic challenges can be, turned around for the benefit of the people. And having said that, I think I also want to talk about, I wouldn't want to spend more time talking about what the economic situation is. Everybody knows that. But I want to talk about something that is so important and that may determine how we expect positive outcomes, that will determine how we expect a total turnaround of the economy from this administration. And that talks about the interaction between policy reforms and the economic fundamentals, or let me call it economic structure, right? It's not unusual in any country to ask to see new policy interventions and reforms to have not so much, positive in the immediate positive outcomes, because first of all, you have to look at the impact of economic policy lags. So most of the policies could be initiated now, and you may not see immediate impact because when you have policy interventions within high economic volatility and instability, you are playing a very dangerous game, and the outcome may not be something that you will just be seeing now. So the first factor we need to consider also in judging the current administration or in looking at the economic benefits is the policy lag. The second one is also the trade-off. The trade-offs in economics are so important because, especially during this period, when you want to achieve objective A, you have to be prepared to also encounter some unexpected outcomes, which I think we are seeing now, inflation rates and some of the key macro instability challenges that we are having now. And the third one, which for me is so important, is the interaction between the policy reforms that we're experiencing now and the economic structure that we have also been having for the past years. Let's go back a little bit to what happened in 4 or 5 years ago before the current administration. Our economic structure does not and may not be able to enhance any strong or efficient policies for a very long time. First of all, we are having a situation where our productive capacity is weak, extremely low. We also have a situation where our fiscal space is challenged. That has also been talked about earlier. So obviously you can group different players in the productive capacity of the Nigerian economy into 3. The first ones are the drivers. The second one are the stagnators. And the third one are the draggers. These critical agents have capacity to enhance or to reduce the impact of any government policy intervention. And when you look at it from the sectoral level, you can see how these different players also interact. So you have a case in Nigeria where most of the economic drivers along the sectoral level are contributing about 40% to GDP. They have contribution to GDP about 40% and about 60% to GDP growth. These sectors are obviously what we know, high city, financial, and other services. But one of the challenges, why though we are so happy about them, but these sectors have low capacity to create jobs, right? So they have low job elasticity rates. In other words, Nigerian economy will continue to grow. It doesn't matter the type of policies we're introducing. Will continue to grow on a jobless scale. So that is why you have huge unemployment or underemployment as we have it now. And so the social conditions will still be impacted negatively. Why we acknowledge that the current government is having a better policy environment and clarity, which we have talked about. I don't want to talk about that also. But I think we need to also ask ourselves some deep questions that go beyond the current administration. To have a better country, to have a better economy, we need to move away from highlighting some temporary or short-term policies that we know may not touch the core issues of economic challenges that we have. So most of the sectors that are contributing to our growth or that are driving this growth cannot create jobs. They don't have that capacity. And so you have the stagnators. These are the ones that have been releasing positive growth every year, while others might be experiencing negative growth rate. They are there for us, but they are stagnating us because they are growing between around 0.5 to 2%, and which obviously is lower than the growth rate of our population. So they also are stagnating the growth. And so we need a lot to move the country from where we are now. We just need to have a more sincere and deeper look into how the economy itself is structured and how prepared are we in terms of our productivity capacity. And the last ones are the draggers. These sectors are dragging the Nigerian economy, and it doesn't matter what type of policy you are introducing. At best, you achieve the short-term impact, but in the long term, we need serious conversations around these sectors. And one of them is oil and gas, mining. We are barely touching what we have. We are doing currently for some years now below 2 million production barrels per day. Below, I think we are doing around 1.7 or 1.5. We cannot continue to dream of a better country while we don't know how to optimize our own natural resources. We're just talking about production. We're not even talking about value addition and other petrochemical industrialization along the sectors. So I think we need to be very objective. We need to come up to this sense that we need to do more than what we are doing. These interventions, of course, are necessary because you cannot even talk about the long-term reforms where you leave the short-term implication untouched. As we all say that on the long run, we are all dead. But we need to be very serious that we are going to face another situation years to come if care is not taken into addressing some of these key issues that we have. Our unemployment rate around 5% or so may not be the challenge now, but we are already walking into what we refer to as working poor population crisis. And so you have low unemployment rate, but you have huge underemployment crisis. You don't have problem with jobs, you have problem with quality jobs. So I think these are core structural issues that we need to be taking so that whatever policy implementation the government is experimenting with will have positive impacts in the life of people.
Right.
I want to stop here.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Omisaki. Definitely, I like the word you used there, experimenting with this time. And definitely we've seen some policies come up and have to be shelved, when they see the negative impact. And you did mention short-term policies at this time. We have to be wary of that. And you did highlight the sectors dragging the economy, down at this time. But I'll take it on to Mr. Olusegun Zaccheaus now. Definitely, we've been reporting insecurity, infrastructure gap for the longest time right now in the country. How would you assess the first year of the administration of renewed hope when it comes to infrastructure and security? Because we know the security problem is really over 40% right now. Talk to me about how you assess this administration.
Thank you, Ladi. I think that's a very powerful question you're asking. But for me, and I thank all the other speakers on Nairametrics for this event. I think 1 year is very irrelevant for assessing any administration on infrastructure progress, right? Because there are two important factors you need to note, right? It takes quite a lot to build infrastructure. It takes a lot of capital investment, right? And that's on one end. Then when you build the infrastructure to begin to realize the productivity that the infrastructure provides, take another, time gap, right? But if we look at this administration in the way they sort of look at how they want to invest in infrastructure, right? I think we are making certain progress, right? But you then need also to put this within the overall context of Nigeria. When you ask the question, what should the government be focusing on, right? And what are we solving for? I think for me, if you ask me, what we should be solving for right now is medium-term growth. And if you ask me what drives medium-term growth, right? Medium-term growth is driven by quality of investment you have within your country, right? And what you must answer is, how do we get to the point in which you have quality investment, right? There are certain fundamentals you have to fix, right? Because if you don't fix those fundamentals, you keep on a perpetual cycle that will continue, that you never get out of. I think what this administration has done is to take some critical bold steps to begin to fix those things that can potentially affect us in the long term, right? Which would then attract investment. I think what this administration could have done better, right? Two things, right? Telling the story of the journey Nigeria must take to get to the end state. I don't think we've quite told that story very well. I don't think we've quite managed the expectations that, look, it's going to be really difficult in the short term, and we need to face it, right? And for a better medium term, right? I think the second bit is the ability of the government to really impact the vulnerable segment of the economy. I don't think we've also done that quite well. But in terms of fundamental for the short term, I think the government has set this in place. And let's bring it back to some of the issues that we're dealing, that you sort of mentioned. I think the first one around insecurity, I think is a problem that the government has tried, but for me, also fixing insecurity is also a systematic issue. And I think at that area, the government still needs to invest a lot more to ensure both production from agricultural perspective and the long-term attractiveness of Nigerian economy from a security evaluation perspective is better. Let me go back to the point around infrastructure. And you remember I mentioned infrastructure is a long-term game, right? And it's not just what government has to do alone. And as one of the speakers mentioned, that you need a lot of public-private partnership. And more importantly, you need an attractive environment that can bring in capital for you to drive the infrastructure growth, right? So I think it's a long way to go on that. I think a couple of steps have been taken that in the right direction. But I think for me, fundamentally, infrastructure drives long-term growth, right? And for us to achieve long-term growth, and I'm going to end with this, you must attract good quality capital that can drive those growth, right? And I think for me, what the government must continue to solve for, which they've started, is to solve for attracting investment that can drive growth, while sort of helping to ameliorate the short-term issues via intervention and other mechanism that can, be put in place. Another important point, as I end up, and I know we talked quite a bit around policy, and I like what Dr. Mishakin said. I think every Nigerian must understand the importance of policy trade-off. And when people talk about the government and policy, and the question I ask them is, what is the alternative policy path, right? And what would that alternative policy path result in? Right. I think given this administration, some of the big policy that have been taken, for me, is the best within this scenario they have. Right. I think, for example, if we talk about the balance between exchange rate devaluation versus subsidy impact, right? You also need to know that, look, when there's exchange rate devaluation, right, government gets more revenue, right? Obviously, it impacts subsidy. So the question we should be asking is that how has those played up, at a macro level for the government, and how would they navigate it going forward?
All right, thank you so much for that, Mr. Zacchaeus, and thank you for keeping it concise at this time. Going forward, we have to try and make our responses as concise as possible so that we can meet up the time, because there's so much to unpack here. And I'll be bringing in Professor Ogunlana Olarinwaju Fatai, and this time we're going to be talking about the president's drive right now to attract investors, foreign investors. This time we've seen notable moves here, the UAE trip, the G20 in India. How would you assess these foreign trips from the perspective of attracting investment for infrastructure and security? And if we were doing things right, do you think the president would really have to go out there, marketing Nigeria as an investment destination at this time? Talk to me, Professor Fatai. You might have to unmute.
Yeah, thank you so much, the moderator. And I really appreciate the Nairametrics for giving me this opportunity to showcase my comment on this platform. Now, the president has really done marvelously well over the past few months that he has assumed office. And he has been trying as much as possible to curtail the challenges that the economy actually faces. Now, going from one country to another in order to attract foreign investors is a good form of our initiative, or it's a good development for the country, because in a country where we have a gap between the savings as well as investment, there is need for foreign investors to actually come in to cushion on the gap between the savings. The government has actually, the president has actually done marvelously well in that directive. But from the scorecard of what I have seen and what I've read, this drive of the government, it has not brought home significant improvement into the progress as well as the aspirations of the Nigerians. Every day, we keep recording massive problem in our economic dispositions, inflation, unemployment, despite the attractiveness of our foreign investors. Automatically, to me, I will definitely want to carry my discussions to the area of human capital development, because human capital development actually plays a pivotal role in bringing the investors into the economy. Because if one critically looks at the program of the president, human capital development actually remains the pivotal program which he has actually advanced for us, because human capital development has the potentials of raising productivity. And most importantly, I would definitely want to speak about education, because to me, education is the means in which we can transform the society, and this will definitely attract investors. A country that is deficient of education may not have a good disposition towards the needs of what foreigners actually pushes to us. In most of our, to me, education, of course, we are talking of practical skills, technology, as well as vocational education. They are critical dispositions to education needs. Also, we are lagging behind in terms of our electricity power supply. Electricity power supply actually cripples domestic production, and this gives a kind of a disincentive to foreigners coming into the economy. Also, in terms of infrastructures, teaching materials, research equipment in most of our universities are lagging behind. All these, they constitute a cog in the wheel of our progress. Above all, this government have a laudable program, but how would the government actually sustain the issue of granting of loans to some of our university students in order to upgrade their standard? To me, granting of this loan is just a way of copying what actually transpired in advanced countries, where they are more organized and coordinated in their programs. But there is need for government to have enough tracking facility where students are adequately monitored. But the question which I want to put forward is that, do government actually have records of those in the university education? All these programs which being put forward by the government, they are political score sheets. Again, on special interest, particularly in skill acquisition, technology and vocational education, though education, of course, remains a driver of our educational system. Acquisition of skills would prepare prospective students in the university for employment in the labor market, particularly if the skills they acquired in their universities matches with the labor market demands.
Right, Prof.
Of much importance is that on the upgrade of infrastructures that we have, which the administration has been advocating for quite some time, we do find that these infrastructures which they've been trying to upgrade, they have never yielded positive results. To me, specifically, is the problem there is funding. There should be increase in the university allocation and also progression in the internally generated revenue of those universities.
Right.
And I want to advise that from an academician point of view, that money that is being saved from the subsidy removal should be directed to finance educational infrastructure, because education, of course, is symbiotic to knowledge sharing, and this constitutes an integral part of a human development. And also, health accessibility, of course, is another dimension of human capital development, which is a function of our foreign attractiveness into any economy. Because the administration of Bola Ahmed Tinubu has initiated a lot of moves in order to revolutionize Nigeria's health system by strengthening the health insurance coverage throughout the whole nation. And
all right.
Yeah. And again,
Prof, thank you so much.
The problem here is that we are trying to strengthen health facilities. Where are the medical personnel that will manage these facilities? Greener pastures has attracted all those medical facilities. Japa syndrome is another aspect. Now, the bottom line there is that government needs to pay attention to human capital development in order to attract foreign investors.
Very, very important, very important suggestions there, Professor Olaraju. Thank you so much for that. You know, highlighting spending for education and healthcare, really critical sectors. Definitely, we've seen that some governments are struggling with revenue at this time. They've had to cut spending, on those segments. But definitely that is a bad move right there. But thank you so much, Prof, for highlighting all of that. Definitely a very interesting session there. I'm going to hand things over now. I'm going to take a pause right now and hand over to Faith Dafe, and she's going to be handling the next panel now. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Ladi, for that interesting session, and of course, all the panelists that have contributed so far. Because of time, we're just going to dive right in. I'm going to be talking with Mr. Tope Fashua, Mrs. Hawa Mustafa, Professor Ogunlano Olarewaju Fatai, Dr. Muda Yusuf, Ms. Olusegun Zacchaeus, and Dr. Olusegun Omishaki during this session. And we're going to be focusing mostly, of course, on human capital development of investments and what is happening with labor. So on that note, I'm going to quickly get to Mr. Tope Fashua now, because we're talking about the issue of the minimum wage. We know that the Minimum Wage Review Act specifies that this happens every 5 years, and that expired in April. So we already are behind time when you talk about, the issue of the minimum wage review. And we have had different conversations going on there, whether it is with government, there's a tripartite committee, of course, we know that, the organized private sector, labor, and we know that there's some sort of stalemate. The president met with labor unions last week. There's going to be a further meeting next week. So I'm just going to dive into the question right away. Let's talk about the issue of setting a new minimum wage. This is directed to Mr. Tope Fashua. What are your thoughts, on this debate of setting a new minimum wage? And does this present an opportunity for the federal government to link wages to productivity and drive reforms? I'd like to hear from you on that, Mr. Fashua.
Well, thank you very much, Faith. It's good to see you once again. And basically, well, quick one. Ordinarily speaking, there's a negotiation taking place, and because I work in government, I try not to color that negotiation. Because it could be dangerous. I think they're getting to a certain point where there'll be an agreement, and I see that the president is also ready to make concessions as well, because everybody knows, when you do the kind of very profound reforms that we have done, then of course the wage curve will shift outwards. Everybody needs to earn a little bit more. I am a little bit more on the side of the most vulnerable and the poorest people in society. The idea behind minimum wage is to say, look, let's set a benchmark below which nobody will pay, and below which it becomes illegal when you say you're employing somebody. For example, now, if you're employing anyone full-time in Nigeria, you're paying them 20,000, it's actually illegal because the minimum wage is supposed to be 30,000. A lot of issues then come up. Should we have the same minimum wage in expensive Lagos, expensive Port Harcourt, expensive Yenagoa or Abuja, compared with places like maybe Kebbi, which is not so expensive. Maybe places like Ondo State, where I'm from, not particularly very expensive, and so on. Places like Lokoja, Kogi is actually quite expensive for some reasons. So, that comes up. The second thing is that you're now thinking about, should we actually begin to move towards a scenario where people get paid per hour so that we can target productivity? Yes, however, you cannot have that discussion in a rancorous atmosphere. When you want to have that kind of profound discussion, which is going to change the way we think about work, you need everybody to be together in terms of their thinking. And this brings me to some of the points that some of the other speakers have raised. For example, Dr. Michakin talks about jobs and jobless growth. The thing we should be thinking about now is how the world of work and employment has changed globally, and that AI is coming for all of us. And when AI comes, there's going to be fewer kind of, low quality jobs that are already being taken out now by machines and being done much more. Any repetitive work is being done a lot more efficiently, and we cannot compete with AI on that level. Why? Because AI, robots, and so on, they're ready to work 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days in a year, subject to a little bit of just, if you like, just some sort of servicing. You know, you don't even have to service its intelligence, as it were, artificial intelligence. So that's it. So we need to begin to think about that. I think we're all being moved into a new era, and I think that our thinking has to also evolve to that level. Even when this gentleman spoke about the economic structure, I think it's also Mishak, he spoke about economic structure that we run. The point is that from my position as an economist, I'm saying that the global economic system is broken down. And I wrote an article about that. It's in Premium Times, I think the cable as well recently. You know, that's why you see the riots in Kenya, but not only in Kenya, as far as Pakistan and in Europe, you know, people are just waiting because we've seen a scenario where the wealth of the top tech companies, the Googles of this world, the Alphabet, the Facebook, Microsoft, they have actually doubled and tripled their net worth since 2020. That should concern us in 4 years. Some of them have tripled. That means that global wealth is going in one direction, and that human beings, the rest of us that are looking for jobs, we're getting the short end of the stick. According to Thomas Piketty, he wrote his book in 2011 thereabout, titled Capitalism in the 21st Century, that when he looked at the data over 200 years, we find out that the reward for capital has gone up stratospherically, whereas the reward for labor has plateaued, even is dropping. So it's everyone's concern. 8 billion people in the world, maybe 6 billion of those who can work, you know, should be working. We all should be worried. So our thinking about some of these things should begin to change. So very quickly, I'll just say, Dr. Muda is worried about the revenue of Nigeria and all that. I think that he said that we may not be able to. I don't see why we can't make it, because again, mind you, the Naira is what, maybe 40 kobo last year. Okay. So, I mean, we've devalued, meaning that everybody has also added, everybody who's producing something has added to their prices. That's why inflation is where it is. So I'm of the opinion we should be aggressive in going after our revenue and ensuring, in fact, there's no reason why we shouldn't double the numbers that we had last year. You know, and I think that that's what we're looking at, you know. I'll just talk about two more things and then I'll be gone. Very sorry, Faith. So, but when you spoke about debt, you know, the fact that, the debt seems to be choking, let me say this very clearly. No serious nation, you waste so much time talking about how to repay debt. Even companies, Dangote is not thinking about how to repay his debt. He's thinking about how to increase his turnover so that he can surmount that and expand his business. So a country we are concerned with how do we expand our GDP. The discussion about expanding GDP has not been had as much as it should. And so, for example, now the MBS is thinking about rebasing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pastor.
Yeah, so just a second. We're going to go back to maybe number one and number two. But I just want to land on that, you know, the issue is not about debt being too much. The issue is, are we growing? If we're not growing, we should be worried. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Faswa. I know that you have a lot to say, but we are a bit, you know, pressed for time. So we're going to move on very quickly. And I'm going to be talking with Mrs. Hawa Mustafa here, drawing on your experience, basically, of working with labor unions and civil service, still talking about the issue of the minimum wage. You know, the labor is currently in talks with the federal government, the TUC, the NLC. They are, you know, insisting on a 250,000 Naira minimum wage, and they're talking about this being a living wage, actually. But can the government afford this? We know that of all the state governments, about 14 state governments could not even afford to pay the 30,000 Naira minimum wage. And we know that Zamfara just said they were going to implement it a couple of months ago. The organized private sector is insisting on paying 62,000 Naira because they're saying that by the time you put everything together and look at what, you know, the economy is saying and the draw on the resources that they have, this is what they can afford. NECA has released a very strong statement on that. So let me talk to you, Mrs. Hawa, you know, on this. Can the government really afford this by the time you look at all of the data on the table and also looking at the private sector and what they have to deal with? Do you think that this is feasible? Hello, Mrs. Howard, are you there? You might have to unmute so we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I was trying to unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Can
Yes,
you hear
absolutely.
me?
Go right ahead. Yes, we can hear you. Go on.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. I also want to join my other colleagues in appreciating the organizers of this very important discussion. To go to your question, first of all, I must say with a lot of emphasis and a strong sense of responsibility that indeed the government is capable with enough resources that this country is endowed to pay even much more than 250,000 naira. The 250,000 naira that we're talking about is less than $200 per month. For goodness sake. And I want to, align this with the way policies, are designed and implemented in this country. We design policies, economic policies, and target growth, but it is usually a growth that is slanted towards a few, and the majority usually do not get the positive, outcome or consequences, or get most of the negative consequences of the kind of growth that we're implementing in this country. Can you hear me? A lot of echo.
Yes, we can hear you. Go on.
Okay. I think my other phone. So this is a country that if you look at the economic statistics in this country, very recently, about I think sometime in 2019, Oxfam came out with a very robust, study where it talked about the inequality in this country. Today, we have about less than 3% of the total population of this country owning at least 90%, between 85 to 90% of the total wealth. And each time our economic policies are churned out, the policy creates more wealth. And the country needs to do is to find a way to balance the creation of wealth and the distribution of the wealth. And I think this is where we are failing in our policy. If our policy is only looking at creation of wealth and not balancing this with how the wealth is distributed, then we continue to look at one side and blame the other side or victimize the other side for not understanding what government is targeting policies for reform policy. Some of the issues that had been talked about earlier achieved. What has been the focus of this government in the last 1 year, i.e. tax reform? When the government traditionally talks about tax reform, it is about how to increase VAT. It is about how to increase income tax. Oftentimes, the worker is targeted. There is no time we talk about tax reform that the worker does not, or the worker is found wanting. The worker tax is automatically taken at source. And what is the totality of the workers' tax? Even the informal sector, the petty tax in our markets, we call in terms of tax reform, is the area where we have leakages. We are in hundreds of millions of naira we lose revenue that should accrue to the government. Our tax reform hardly focuses in that direction. And if we effectively focus on the areas of leakages, if we plug those leakages, even if we successfully plug leakages by 50 to 60%, I can assure you that the government will be able. When Labour says and insists on this, Labour does not just come blindly without making its own homework to say that this is what we want as living minimum wage. It is that I can assure you Labour will have done a lot of, assessment. Labour will have looked at our economic policies. How are we generating the wealth? Where is the wealth going to? Why are we having leakages? Who is benefiting from the leakages? Why do we talk so much about corruption and we focus on the civil service? What's the Orosanye report or policy come to the rescue? What about the areas where there is huge corruption, including corporate corruption, even in the private sector, aided by politicians? What about those areas? What about the area also, making our policy? Because sometimes, look, it's not so much about the income. It is also that what about looking at policies that also help people, even in the informal sector, to the 250,000 naira that the workers have failed. Why should the workers have resources on transportation, for instance? Because the transportation sector is not functioning.
Mrs. Howard, let me quickly direct this question.
Why should the worker pay so much for health services in health infrastructure that is accessing health problems? So this is it. So when the worker says we need this money, don't look at it in quantum. Don't look at it in terms of figure. 250,000 naira is huge. It's not huge. Break it down. What is the worker expected to spend it on in a situation where food inflation is hovering close to 40%? How do you say half of this income, is it sufficient to take care of feeding, to take care of children's education, to take care of transportation? At the same country, how much do we expend when we talk about?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hawa.
Super highways
Mrs. Hawa
everywhere.
Mustafa, thank you so much. There's a lot. Yes. Thank you. Because of time.
Productive expenditure that does not translate into real development for the people and for the workers.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I know you have a lot to say, and I honestly wish we had time to take all of it. I was going to ask you about, the implication on inflation as well, but maybe we'll come back to that if there is time, so that I can quickly move on to, the issue of, talking about student loans and all of that. And I'm going to direct this to Professor Ogunlano Olarewaju Fatai. We see that the government has increased tuition across multiple institutions. We're seeing protests, from students in universities talking about the increase in, tuition. And then we now, of course, know that there's a student loan issue that is on the table. Nelfon is talking about bringing in more institutions, right? But let's talk about the importance of the Student Loan Act in itself. Do you think that this is working overall? That is the issue of the student loan, especially for students in all of the tertiary institutions, that we have.
Yeah, thank you so much, moderator. Now, if you look at the issue of student loan, it's a function of government revenue inflow. And if you look at it from this perspective, government spending these days can no longer sustain educational funding based on the increasing nature of complex flow of government revenue. Again, government revenue, it has been drastically constrained by crude oil crude oil revenue sales, which have not been positive enough due to international fluctuations in the petroleum prices, and also due to mismanagement and corruption within the economy. Again, if you look at the monolithic product itself, it cannot generate enough revenue to sustain domestic financial resources as well as the student loans. There are kind of loopholes in government finances, and there are gaps between revenue inflow as well as the expenditure. Now, there is monumental corruption, which has constrained financial stock. Now, as such, government cannot muster enough financial resources in order to sustain educational development. Again, loan scheme by the government to indigent students in the university is a laudable program, is a good objective. But how would the government finance it? Will it be sustainable? Will it be persistent and consistent? Will it not be selective? As I've said earlier, loan scheme is practically a function of our sustainable revenue inflow. If you look at it prospectively from the dictates of what is happening in this country, officials of government, they commit financial resources to areas that are not beneficial to the growth of the economy, but rather on corruption-prone projects that would not yield any positive result to the government. And there is an implication to this. If we have large numbers of students out of the university, it has an implication on the nation. There will be high rate of dropouts, increase in crime rates, shortage of manpower skills needed in order to finance progressive development. It's a food for thought for the government. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that succinct response, Professor. Let's move on to Dr. Muda Yusuf. Like I said, we're pressed for time, so we're trying to move very, very fast. Let's talk about, public finance reforms that a lot of people would have expected would have been implemented by now, looking at detailed budgets to help seek dollar budget support from international agencies such as the World Bank. We have the minimum wage there as well, to help cushion the effects of the removal of subsidy, or, well, right now, subsidies back. So whether it is partial removal or full removal, what additional public finance reforms should have been expected by now? And I'm directing this to Dr. Muda Yusuf very quickly.
Well, thank you very much. Well, there is very little to add to what I said earlier about public finance. First is to look at the structure of government spending. That is extremely very important. We need to put it down. Even though we have had the argument that the challenge we have is not an expenditure problem, it's a revenue problem. But I believe that we need to act on both sides. Just as I said earlier, there have been some great deal of efforts to reform the tax system, not only to streamline the taxes, but to optimize, tax revenue and get more taxes leveraging on technology. And I'm sure that the government has gone very far with that. And of course, we need to also ensure that we create the right kind of environment for the economy itself to grow, because there's a correlation between economic performance, GDP growth, and government revenue. That's extremely very important. And at the heart of all of that is to ensure that you have stability in our foreign exchange markets. That is very critical. And here I must commend the Central Bank of Nigeria. At least in the last 6 weeks or so, we have seen some measure of stability. The volatility in the foreign exchange market had reduced, and I'm hoping that the CBN will also sustain that. And in order to also ensure stability in the forex environment, we need to step up the issue of import substitution. That's extremely very important, because exchange rate is a price, and the fundamentals that drive any price is a supply and demand fundamentals. In order to ease the pressure of demand on forex, we need to accelerate import substitution. And one of the best ways to do that is to see what we can do very quickly with refining of petroleum products domestically, because close to 30% of our forex demand is coming from the demand importation of petroleum products. So we need to ensure that the Port Harcourt refinery, the Dangote refinery, and other initiatives that are in the works are encouraged to come up very, very quickly. That's very important. It's also important that we fast track the whole concept of backward integration. Our manufacturing sector is too import dependent. The government may need to do some heavy lifting to develop some core industries so that many of these manufacturers can source their raw materials domestically so that we can grow the economy and grow revenue. It's also important to look at export opportunities. One of the opportunities we have when we have a weak currency is opportunities in the export environment. And we are beginning to see some traction, but you can do a lot more by encouraging a lot more exports, by removing barriers, bureaucratic barriers, issues of procedures, issues at the ports and all of that. That will help. And of course, oil outputs. Government have been doing a lot around increasing oil output and all of that. But again, we are not where we should be. So we need to do a lot more in that space. We need to encourage more investment in gas sector. Again, I must commend the government. Recently, there was a lot of incentives given to those who are investing in gas, because actually we have more opportunities in gas even than in crude oil. So that, of course, is a welcome development, and we need to do a lot more of creating more incentives to support investors in that space. And we also need to ensure that we bring confidence back to the forex markets. And one of the ways to bring confidence back is to ensure, stability. Yes, we want the exchange rate to appreciate, but that's a much bigger fundamental issue, which is driven by the fundamentals of supply to a large extent. But in the meantime, you should have a framework to ensure stability so that this challenge of speculative attack on the currency will be minimized. So those are the things I think we need to do. Fundamentally, we need to grow the economy in order to be able to grow revenue, and we need to also watch our expenditure. I think it's extremely very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Olmuda Yusuf, for your contribution on that. We know that in recent times, the World Bank recently approved this $2.5 billion for Nigeria, subject to certain conditions. But we also know that one of the biggest challenges we have had so far is attracting FDIs and actually even retaining the ones that we have before, because we have had, several multinationals leave, in recent times. I'll direct this to Mr. Olusegun Zaccheaus, really, this question. Nigeria has had problems attracting, significant capital inflows and FDIs. What is your perspective, and how the federal government has performed thus far when you talk about attracting large dollar inflows and, of course, FDIs? This is directed to Mr. Olusegun Zaccheaus.
Thanks a lot for that excellent question. A couple of points to note, right? Some of these things don't happen by magic. They take time. You build confidence of the investor, and with that, begin to bring in the inflow. And some of the things you can see lately is some of the revision in our credit outlook by some of those global rating agencies, which is showing that, look, there's a bit more positive sentiment, about Nigeria economy. But if you ask me, for an FDI holder, what are the quick criteria for me to make an investment in an economy? One key important point: money out, right, at a predictable price in the future, right? I'm not saying at a low or high price, right? And I think, going back to what Dr. Moda said, I think creating a predictability and stability in the FX environment is really critical to attract this FDI. So I would say the government is doing all the right things, for me, from my point of view, to begin to attract this. But this takes time. And I guess, as I also speak to investors, one of the things you want to see is the consistency of this policy, right? Because what you don't want to see is policy being reversed, after 6 or 9 months, right? And I'm a bit optimistic that in few months to come, you begin to see a lot of activities. As a consultant, and I can tell you, there are a lot of activities going on. And there are people starting refinery, there are people starting different businesses. And we're seeing, that interest in foreign capital coming into Nigeria. So I would say a good job has been done so far. Still a lot needs to be done going forward. But let me just make a very quick point to align my point. I think one of the things we must understand as a nation is that there are trade-offs that policy authority has to deal with, right? And there's a sequence of policy that needs to happen. You can't overinvest in long-term growth if you don't solve the issue of stability in the short term. And solving the issue of stability can mean lower growth. If you have high inflation, the approach of monetary policy is to slow down the economy, which will result in slower growth. When you have better stability, you get economic activity picks up again. So I think for me, one of the things the government can do is building a bit more clarity about the journey. Where are we today? Where are we going in 1 year? Where are we going to be in 3 years? What are the challenges we're going to face? I think it's pertinent that government spend a bit of time telling the story as they say, so that the expectations can be better managed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Olusegun Zaccheaus, for that contribution, talking about trying to make sure there are no flip-flops in policy and sustaining it so that, you know, investors have a certainty when they come into the country. I'm going to go on now to Dr. Olusegun Omishaki, and we will be looking at what is going on with fiscal policies and, of course, monetary policies. We have seen the CBN in recent times roll out different policies. The CBN has been proactive. That's what a lot of people have said. Commentators have had that particular perspective. And we have the interest rates going up. CBN talking about that is its monetary toolkit and it has to keep using it. But the MPC also tells us about how, well, we need the fiscal, policies to balance this because there's only so much monetary policies can achieve. So asking you this question directly, what is your perspective on the CBN's actions? And what should be expected, when you're talking about other participants of the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Trade and Investment, Ministry of Agriculture, that's talking about the role of the fiscal policies as well. First, your take on the CBN action so far, and what is expected on the fiscal side, Dr. Olusegun Omishaki.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. I think it's pretty clear that everyone can agree to the fact that we have better monetary policy management, better clarity, and that's as a result of the fact that CBN or monetary policy is not just one of those, CBN, as it were, is not just one of those sectors. This is or ministries. This is a sector or a ministry that its efficiency will determine the direction of the economy. So you may not really expect more from some other ministries compared to what you have in terms of the monetary policy and the fiscal policy, of course. But I think just like Mr. Shegun also referenced, we have to be very careful about how we want to achieve everything. Want to have better economic outcome in the short term, especially when we are in the state of emergency. We are pretty much in the state of emergency, not at least for now, but I think for some years. So my belief is that, yes, the CBN has been doing fantastically well in terms of listening to people, listening to business leaders, and understanding how to manage the current situation. And I just hope that they will continue in that space. I also believe that the other ministry, especially the Ministry of Finance and the other key ministries, are learning from this. You may not, of course, expect huge fiscal changes because in that space, it boils down to how you are able to change your capacity to to attract investments, to produce more, and to do a lot of things. So that takes time. That for me looks like a long-term impact or outcome, aside the fact that you can quickly increase your revenue from taxing people, which may not be the best in this period. So, but apart from that, I think my advice really for the government is that it's good for us to look at it, and the people also, let me say my advice to the people is that it's good for us to look at the short-term policy implementations and benefits, but we must also look critically to say, if we are to play the game of short-term, we'll keep playing that game, and that there may not be any benefit for the country on the long term. So I think the government is trying to do the best it will do, given the limited resources, especially in the space of clearing monetary and other policy space that we've experienced that have been highly bastardized for some years now. So, but I would also want to speak to the fact that whatever targets or objectives that we are setting as a nation, we should also be very careful as to the fact that this also need to go along what we have in our different plans. We have the MTNDP, the medium-term national development plan. We have the long-term plan. We have a series of objectives. We have targets, because I see people asking the question of what's the target of the government for growth, for inflation, and so many things. We need to be working with a view, with a long-term view, as to what we need to achieve. In the short term, yes, we are where we are, but I wish that we can begin to ask core questions that border on our competitiveness, on as a nation, our productivity, on the issues around informal economy, and then making sure that everything lies within the areas of macroeconomic stability. It's been said earlier that we cannot achieve any even long-term plan or see clearly when we don't have a relative stability in the short term. So, and I think the government is doing that. We need to improve more efforts into making sure that we arrest the inflation. It is understood that yes, inflation and interest rates are more or less like trade-offs, and theoretically we can say that businesses or private sectors will be more negatively affected with inflation, higher inflation, than what you have if you reduce the interest rate down. So I think the government, the monetary authority should continue what they are doing at making sure that this inflation rate is really controlled. According to the CBN, I think they are looking at having 22% growth, inflation rate by the end of the year. That may look so ambitious, but it's pretty important for them to look at targeting inflation as we have. So everything should be, while we maintain our focus, policy focus on stabilizing the economy and the macro indicators, we also need to look at consolidation. So you have the stability, we need to consolidate this within the time frame, which looks like more or less a medium term outcomes, and then the long term, which is acceleration. We need to have a long-term vision for the country, and we need to work with that. It may not be easy in the short term, but if we want to always get everything in the short term, we may lose out on the ultimate goal of the country. And I will end with that.
Thank you so much. Dr. Segun, definitely a lot of plans going on for the long term. And like you said, at the end of the day, it is very ambitious that the CBN has this goal for 22% inflation rate for the end of the year. Hopefully, they're able to achieve that. So with this, I'll hand it over to Ladi to go on to the very next session as we continue this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Faith. Very interesting session there. It's time to move things quickly as possible. Time for a reality check. Right now, we're going to be evaluating the impact of policies so far. The question is, are the policies weak, or do we need to give these policies more time? I still have with me Ms. Hawa Mustafa. I'll be coming to you first now. We see the monetary policy side working hard to tame inflation with rate hikes, interventions in the forex market. We saw one, I think, on Friday this week, but we still see weakness with the Naira, even though we see stability. Inflation is still high. From your viewpoint and that of SMEs, why is it that these macroeconomic trends have not yet displayed positive signs at this point? Ms. Mustafa, you have the floor. Hello, Ms. Hawa Mustafa, can you hear me? Are you there?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think if there's one thing Nigeria, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Fantastic, I can hear you. You can go on.
Okay, so one of the things I think Nigeria is, very, and of course, laws. However, one thing is the process of implementation. We have certain expectations, usually positive expectations, because nobody draws up a policy towards a negative outcome. However, the very fundamental and important issue that should underline, the policy implementation process, which is not put into consideration oftentimes, is the underlying and historical socio-economic environment over which these policies are expected to operate. I give you an instance. I mean, removal of subsidy, for instance. In an economy where, unfortunately for us, even in this 21st century, in terms of consumption and production, is about 85% of the population is living in poverty. In a situation where productivity is extremely low, in a situation where consumption, population, and our per capita income is still also very, very weak, subsidy has a serious ripple effect on the macro and micro economy. And when you do this without creating an enabling policy or program that sucks the shock, the expected shock, and you go about a policy implementation as if everything is normal, that is part of the problems we have. Such a policy is not going to have the desirable positive, a lot of negative impact you talk about. And that is why when there also does not seem to connect with the people which policy, is also targeting. And I think these are fundamental issues. So for me, in moving forward, for our policies to act, it is important that these policies connect with the people, not just in terms of where are the people. It has to be holistically inclusive across horizontally and vertically.
All right.
Horizontal, properly inclusive, holistically inclusive, because people are we need to understand the socio-ecological locations of the people, the gender of the people, the different income levels, the different structure or location of the people, and see how differentiated impact that these policies are all, so that the solution is also different characteristics of people that these policies are also meant to target.
Okay, I definitely thank you so much. Even though we had some distortions there, but thank you so much for your contributions, Mr. Hawa, Mustafa. I'll take it on to Mr. Abdul Rauf Aliyu. Let's try to make our responses as concise as possible because of time. So recently I asked on social media, is there any good or service that hasn't gone up in price? Recently, and no one could give me something. I don't know if anybody can give me something here, but is there any hope in sight for Nigeria's cost of living, challenges at this time? This for Mr. Abdul Rauf Aliyu.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Mr. Williams, for the good moderation so far. I think a lot have been said, and I think it's one of those things when you answer your questions last, everything will have been said, so you have nothing to say, just to recap. But I will want to make it known that, as you said, there's nothing that has not increased in price, whether it is food, transportation. And a lot of presenters before me have spoken around the reforms that have taken place and the impact it has had. The trade-offs, again, it has had, and what we need to do going forward. I just wanted to add one or two things, and I think I will be speaking from a political risk perspective, looking at what those reforms are not things we can step back, even though we made mistakes of not doing what we call sequencing. It is not the first subsidy itself that was bad, but it was the floating and the subsidy who came almost at the same time, and so they were, they had repercussion efforts. The economy had not absorbed the shock from one, and then the other one came, and so it would take a lot of time, a lot of intervention. And again, one of the things I've always said was that, again, when this present government set up to do these policies, yes, they had good intentions, but I always tell people it wasn't strategic, it wasn't deliberate, and it wasn't intentional. In the fact that we are now reacting to certain challenges that was thrown up, rather than having, we have these deliberate things we wanted to do. This economic emergency thing of certain food that the government was trying to import, and several other things where things we would have foreseen, and if you had had proper scenarios. But for me, let me quickly run around. I think I'll just try to see, okay, given all these things are happening, what will businesses and households really be doing in the coming days and months? Which for me, I think it's pretty much important. And so I think governments will see a lot of businesses try. Governments, I would advise governments to do a lot of costs optimization. They will need to prioritize the operational efficiency by reviewing their processes. They will need to renegotiate their contracts. It is credit contracts that we had, supply chain issues, because these things are discretionary and might affect. And so they also need to leverage technology as much as possible to bring down costs, so they can be able to streamline operations and bring down costs. And then one other critical thing businesses must do is that businesses must engage in diversification. Two types of diversification: either they diversify in more products, or they do geographical diversification. Try to see if they can move into other countries so that it will hedge against the risk of forex. Probably if it's possible for you to diversify into other geographies and also go into other products. We've seen one or two companies who have done that. And then I think the next thing I think I always advise companies to do is also to look around price management, which is also very critical. You also understand that you want to sell, but again, you also need to look at the disposable income of the people who are buying. And then people need to prioritize. There are certain things people don't buy anymore. And so you need to look at how you manage price. One of the things we're looking at, most people, so we talk about inflation, then we'll forget what other things that's also happened in Nigeria over the last 12 months. We're also battling with shrinkflation and skimflation. What I'm saying is that the prices have increased, while the product have shrinked, and the quality has dropped. And so people are going to spend, so you're buying something you buy for 100 naira, you're now buying for 300 naira at a lower quantity, at a lower price, and at a lower quality. These are other things, again, that I think the government also needs to intervene and going forward, because if this continues, you will find customers, a lot of consumers, households who also draw back in what they consume, and then it will affect the businesses, again, which will also impact on the revenue. And so and the final, the third aspect, again, is actually around risk management. We need to see governments, a lot of businesses putting in place a lot of robust risk management strategies, hedging against currencies, fluctuation. Yeah, currency has been a bit stable. And because we've had a lot of inflows into, we have a lot of inflows, as from portfolio investors. Again, this is okay. But again, you need to face unforeseen shocks. And then finally, for businesses, you also need to do a lot of engagement and advocacy around government. I'm happy that we have the likes of NSSG here, represented by Dr. Olusegun, and we have Dr. Buddha here. There's a lot of engagements that need to continue to happen around issues around tax incentives, which I think is already going on, around investment, regulatory reforms need to happen. This will enhance the competitiveness that Dr. Olusegun was talking about, and then we can create a favorable operating environment in the long run. So let businesses be able, businesses have that that assurance from government that, look, you need to go through a lot of pain, but again, there's a long time, there's a hope at the horizon. Because if you do not put that hope horizon, and then businesses don't understand where they're going to, it's going to be a bigger challenge. So in as much as we want to have, and so that's why we need to have those, what are those short-term challenges we need to face off? What are the trade-offs we need to make today in order for us to benefit? And then for the individuals and households, I think one of the first things individuals need to do is go back to their budgeting and financial planning, which is also very critical. And then we need to invest a lot in skills application so that we can enhance our employability. Again, Dr. Fashola talked about AI taking over jobs. And so we need to reskill ourselves. Irrespective of what kind of job you do, whether it's in civil service, but you need to reskill. You need to make yourself more competitive and more employable, and so they can take opportunities. For me, I don't think AI will take anybody's job. It's just around how we evolve into the AI world and be able to, because I tell people, The machines are still machines. That's why I call artificial intelligence. If human beings have the nature, even if machines pull out all the data, it's you who actually make, at the end of the day, who take decisions based on intuitions and based on, because the machine do not understand the socioeconomic circumstances of whatever policy decision he might chunk out. If it is so that's one of it. And then we need to have alternative income. So most of us, just like businesses who diversify, individuals also need to diversify. And then finally, we need to have, for individuals, we need community support this time. We need to support one another. It's very, very critical that we support. And then whatever income you earn, and savings and investment, it's time for you when your younger ones call you. Because if you don't do that, you are prone to have more insecurity. You're prone to have people jobless, and then they'll come for us. And so we need, as much as possible,
to
forget about that. This is time for investment and time for. So these are things we need to do. And so I don't want to go to other data. I think, but these are the on what individuals you're actually going through. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Ali. You're definitely promoting natural intelligence there, even though we see AI being talked about so much. Thank you, you both for your contributions. I'm going to hand things over now to Faith, see how we can move this as quickly as possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ladi. We are really pressed for time. The conversation is interesting, but we need to, hasten it right now. And so I'm going to just speak a few issues to talk about. And I want to get to Dr. Messi Bello Abu on this one. Let's talk about SMEs and how they're struggling in the light of the policies that the government has put forward so far. We've heard about, the issues of dealing with inflation, dealing with infrastructure deficits, and, electricity tariff being increased. There's so much going on, and SMEs are struggling. Over 800 companies shut down in the last 1 year. So I want to get your thoughts on this and what you actually think SMEs can do to survive in times, the opportunities and the challenges that are involved.
Thank you so much for this. I appreciate Nairametrics for having me, and it's such an honor to be on this platform. Great discourse so far. I appreciate every panelist here. Yes, what you just discussed is on MSME. And you will agree with me that this is the bedrock of the Nigerian economy, with 90% of businesses worldwide, which is they are all under MSME. And the statistics, they are staggering. 50% of global employment and the 40% of global GDP are generated by the MSME. So now, definitely that they are affected because of the economic situation. Just yesterday, 3 days now, been on a very strategic technical session with the Niger Delta stakeholders meeting, trying to look at how policies can be more favorable to not just the MSME, but the population at large. So it's quite a very appropriate question to be dealing with this morning. The Nigeria economic landscape is characterized definitely by high cost of living, inflation, and a volatile currency. So with the population of over 200 million and growing youth demography, so how can we present this opportunity? So Nigeria definitely presents opportunity for individuals to tap into alternative income stream. And I'll be looking at some of the statistics for us to have a more guided approach to this. The 63% of Nigeria, according to Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, are currently engaged inside also to supplement their income. Because we've listened to the discussion since morning, we've been talking about how the challenges, the opportunities. So it's my interest to note here that 63% of Nigerians are currently involved inside also. And what are these popular sites also? What are these opportunities that we are looking at? In the statistics shows that food vending, 22%, event planning, 18%, and freelance writing and design, 15%. I just made mention of the stakeholders meeting, yes, we've had in Rivers State. And it will interest you to know that almost 250 million was budgeted for that event. And as I sat there as a consultant, as a management consultant, I was looking at the facts and figures. And I said, for everyone that was part of this event, definitely is going home with a minimum of maybe 5M for everyone that was involved. There was a lot of value chain in terms of, and you will agree with me that the bulk of that money definitely must have gone to food in terms of refreshment. So there's a lot to be done for us as MSME if we pay attention to the trends. That is why I'm giving us these statistics. And also another area, one of our speakers talked about AI, the digital space, which is quite profound right now. So the digital space is another space that we can look at as MSME to be able to have alternative means of income. Nigerians have over 100 million internet users, over 100 million internet users, which presents opportunities for digital income stream, that is digital income stream, such as that is the source from Nigeria Communication Commission. And popular among these digital income streams include online tutoring, affiliate marketing, and e-commerce sales. So also we are looking at remote jobs. We know we are high on remote job right now. Absolute alternative means of streams of income is so pivotal right now. The remote job, it will interest us to know that 42% of Nigeria professionals work remotely at least once in a week. And this is the source from remote.com. So they're also saying that these are also alternative means of income. So what are we advocating? Look at your environment. We've established that 90% of businesses worldwide is MSME, and it's the part of the GDP. They make up the GDP of any global economy. So popular among some of these are remote jobs, because I'm profiling solution. Popular among them is opportunities include the software development, which we know is very critical. Then the customer service, which is 20%. Software development, the statistics show that 30% of those that are there, that is part of generating income. Customer service, you can do this online, 20%. Then data analysis, 20%. So these are areas that we can get involved in alternative means of income that will help to ameliorate the current situation. But one thing that we are known for as a country is our grit, our resilience, and our ability to survive against all odds. So if we take the pain to look at areas that we can definitely be part of, I can assure you that just as the economy is struggling, we have a lot of people that are still making it. So look at the alternative means of income. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mercy. I like the fact that you are preferring solutions and saying, in spite of everything, we can find a way through this. And indeed, Nigerians are known for their resilience and their grit. Because of time, I would just want to, bring in Dr. Tokwe Fashiwo very quickly to give us a final commentary on outlook for the economy, for the last quarter of the year. Okay, from the committees that have been set up so far, livestock committee and economic committees, what can we look forward to, and what are the short-term and long-term goals of these committees?
Well, thank you very much once more. Very quickly, I want to thank Dr. Mrs. Abu, who just spoke. She gave some very profound and one thing I quickly want to bring out is that, the issue of minimum wage and all these things about employment goes beyond NLC. The NLC controls about 7 to 8% of working population in Nigeria. 88% of Nigerians work in unstructured environment, hustling, farming, doing all sorts. And the concern of the government is actually about that big number. Secondly, I want to say thank you to Segun Zaccheaus for speaking about communication and telling the story. I actually will admit that that's been a bit of a drawback for us here. And lastly, for Ugo Dre mentioned inflation and interest rate. That's just orthodox thinking. I think that we have to understand that our economy is not quite orthodox, and we have to think for ourselves. So increasing the interest rate, even the World Bank had to admit a couple of days back that our increases in interest rate may not necessarily bring down inflation, because we're not just at that level. That's the problem with monetarism. Monetarism basically talks to, I went back and studied monetarism, even as a special advisor that I am now. I realized that, look, monetarism presupposes that you have very, very good data for it to work. So central bank can do its work, you know, but I think even the central bank understands that to be to some limit. I want to speak finally about, yes, a lot of the, policies being made, a lot of the committees being set up, we expect that they'll work. But if you ask me the question, which is on this paper, that if we renew hope or reality check, as somebody mentioned, there are some parts of the economy that are making it, and I'm sharing these slides now so that we can look at it. For example, look at the bank. This is the Fugas, right? And these guys, Access Bank, 335% increase in profit. First Bank, 325. I'm talking of just even over a period of months and even over a period of 1 year, 256% in UBA, and so on and so forth. That tells you that some part of the economy is making money. Okay, I did a short whatever to just look at it and see, that look, these sectors, creative arts. I understand that Rema is being paid $3 million just for singing at one party in India. Local manufacturing, the car manufacturers, they're beginning to get some business. And the other time I saw, Sin exported about 28 billion worth of cars to Sierra Leone, Naira, so infrastructure is also really coming up. Well, I live in Abuja here. Wike is performing wonders everywhere. Umar here is also known to be a performer. So because of the quantum of Naira we're getting as a result of devaluation of the Naira, we're seeing a bit more from that regard, from that area. Entertainment is making money. The hotels are more expensive. You can't get a booking. Who's paying for them? And local governments are now lucky to get. So essentially speaking, I just want to say that, some parts of the economy are still making money, but the challenge is for all of us. If you look at what is called the product space, this is everything a country can produce, and all the area, chemical, machinery, metal. This is where Nigeria is. Look at that. From this point to this point, there's work for everybody apart from the government. Of course, the government has to take responsibility at the end of the day. You know what I'm saying? So essentially speaking, there's stuff going on, but I also admit the fact that we are not, we need to do a lot more risk management of our policy. We need to be careful about premature load bearing and overload of reforms. No government can solve all the problems. We have to probably choose at some point. We have to be very careful about ideology and be much more pragmatic. We have to look at history, and we have to look at, the broken world economic system, like I said earlier. So anyway, let me stop here. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tokbe Fashua. And because we have had such a long session, it's now past 12. Thank you everyone for being part of it. I'll hand over to Joanna Mustafa, so that she can take it on from here.
All right, thank you so much for that, Faith. It has been a very, very, very interesting session. I can see a lot of engagement in the chat box. I can see the Q&A section as well. I'm sure there are a number of questions there, but our time is fast spent. I guess some of the questions have been answered, but I'd like to entreat our panelists if they can attend to some of those questions while I give the closing remarks. That would be wonderful. But it's been a great session. So many things gained, right? Reality checks indeed. And of course, the needs to align with those realities, right? We've had speakers, highlight the need to reskill, right? To align with some of these realities. We've had speakers talk about going beyond just, wealth creation, but also the need to distribute that wealth that is being created equitably. And there's just so much that has been said, right? I can't even begin to go through it all, but remember, this session is recorded. The full conversation will be made available on YouTube, so you can always come back and go through it again. I just want to say a huge thank you to all our panelists who were able to make the most out of the limited time that we did have. You did an awesome job. And of course, we look forward to hearing more of your thoughts, right? In other thought leadership programs that we have. Remember, Nairametrics, we're always driving these conversations, tracking the economy, and how we're doing, providing financial insights across various platforms, right? We have this webinar quarterly. There's the Industry Outlook monthly, where we zero in on different industries, right? So sometimes it's agriculture, sometimes it's the FMCG, and so on and so forth. So, make sure that you follow Nairametrics across different platforms so that you know what is going on and you stay a part of the conversations. We have programs on radio. Monday is another time. Follow the Money with Godre. There's a podcast now daily. Follow the Money with Godre that you can also listen to and stay abreast with the capital market. There's so much to say, right? But I'll say you should follow us on social media so that you're able to stay abreast with everything and all our thought leadership programs. Again, a huge thank you. I can't thank all our panelists enough. And a huge thank you to everybody. So many things you could have done with your Saturday morning, but you're here today. Shows your interest in the economy. Thank you so much for being a part of today's conversation, and hopefully you get to enjoy the rest of your Saturday and your weekend as well. Thanks once again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.